Ovid's Metamorphoses is one of the most entertaining books of the ancient era in Rome, especially. And sometimes that gives it a bit of a look of, well, it is mere entertainment. It's not Homer. It's not serious. It's not Homer, but it is doing something very different than Homer, or at least trying to accomplish the same thing by different means. The theories behind the Metamorphoses are radically different than the assumptions baked into so many classics of the that are perhaps more judiciously judged to be superior. But the Metamorphosis is significant, and in many ways, it is an answer to that more staid classical tradition that is very singularly pro-authoritarian, that is very singularly hierarchical, that is very singularly stabilizing. This is a destabilizing model of the universe that is being introduced here, and that's significant. Uh, Coming out in, I believe it was 8 AD. Ovid is, of course, just a slightly younger generation than Virgil, but he was on the scene with Virgil and Horace and Catullus. Well, Catullus was a little bit earlier, but this is all the prime era of Augustan Rome, and he offers this poem as a, in one sense, it is a counterpoint to the Aeneid, to Virgil's big magnum opus that was the big dog on the block, let's say, and but you can't just look at it in exclusively that term, because it deserves more. Ovid deserves recognition in his own right, not just as a footnote to Virgil, because in a lot of ways, what he's trying to do is more significant, is more ambitious than Virgil. Virgil was producing a sequel, if you will, to the Odyssey, and marrying it to Roman history, to the Roman mythology of the founding of the Roman Empire, and using that as a form of well, propaganda, a form of a national epic. Ovid's doing something very different and taking on that whole notion, really, of trying to shore up the realm of Augustus, and he is at that same time introducing a wildly multifarious concept of life and existence that is probably more realistic and more based in or supported by modern science than certainly anything that Virgil or Homer or any of those guys would have ascribed to. You can see the ambition in the proem, the prologue, the very beginning little invocation at the start. My mind leads me to speak now of forms changed into new bodies. O gods above, inspire this undertaking, which you've changed as well, and guide my poem in its epic sweep from the world's beginning to the present day. Well, even just 5 lines, there's some significant work right there. Right off the bat, this poem is in dactylic hexameter, which you really can't get in the English, but in the original, that is the meter of epic poetry. So this is sort of in form announcing itself as a kind of epic. So immediately, when without even paying attention to what the words mean, the sound of the language, the rhythm of the language, is aligning itself with the epic tradition. So the reader would be automatic, or the reader or the listener, more likely, is automatically introduced to, oh, okay, I know what this is. This is what I've grown up with. This is Virgil. This is Homer. This is all of those guys who write epic poems, and I know what that is about. But so much of it is subverted in the content as you move along, because so much of the epic tradition is about stabilizing forces, or about an effort to stabilize. Think again about the ending of the Odyssey, where Zeus and Athena say, okay, everybody go back to their corners. We're going to accept Odysseus as the king. You guys are over there. You're not going to fight anymore. You're not going to do anything. All of the violence ends now. We're going to freeze in for in perpetuity. We are going to freeze this social model, this hierarchy. But also, more recently, Virgil, who has a very structured understanding of, okay, Aeneas was picked out by the gods to go and found Rome, and everything he does is predicated on that. And we are told again and again and again that he is fated to do that, and he is approved of when he is acting piously in the pursuit of that goal. So that is always very stable, very certain. But here we're talking about instability and dynamism in the very first line. Forms changed into new bodies. Things are changing. Things are metamorphosizing. These things are becoming different spontaneously. There's agency in that line where forms change of their own authority. There's not necessarily a suggestion in there that gods are doing it, that it is directed in any particular way. But he walks this very fine line, because he also hints at, well, okay, maybe the gods are perhaps directing me to write this poem. Oh gods above, inspire this undertaking which you've changed as well, which is a nice little CYA moment for Ovid, because what he is saying is a bit of a challenge to the prevailing imperial preference of absolute authority, that everything that happens from the gods, and that authority trickles down into the emperor because he is essentially a god as well. So the idea of things happening that is not coming from an authority is very unsettling. But also you gotta love the one-upsmanship, the ambition to out-epic Virgil, in a sense, by saying, guide my poem in its epic sweep, name checking the word epic right there, as in case you didn't get the understanding of the rhythm, from the world's beginning to the present day. And very famously, what Virgil didn't do was take it back that far to the beginning of the world, or didn't really even go into the present day. They hinted at it, of course, hinted about the coming of Augustus, as if he is a kind of Christ figure, a Messiah who will come and usher in a new era. But he doesn't. It is much more concise than that. So now here is Ovid just throwing this out there, like, yeah, I'm going to tell it all. I am going to tell a truly epic story that goes from the creation of the universe right up until me walking along the sidewalk today. And that is ambitious. And of course, it is a little bit grandiose, but maybe he is mocking the idea of the epic to begin with, the idea that we can tell this story because he wasn't around at the very beginning. And reports of the very beginning are sketchy at best. So maybe that is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Maybe he's having a little fun. Maybe it's a satire. I'm not sure. But it is, again, in that epic sound, that dactyl hexameter that has an authority of form, even within a poem that celebrates changing forms. So you're automatically thinking in terms of these forms and the mutability of forms and the superficiality of forms and how that really relates to the meaning of those forms. And then the story he tells is of a creation of the universe, a kind of hesiotic example of the universe coming into being. He's once again, however, very iffy on the creator aspect of it. He says very famously, what is it, line 26, some god, parentheses, or kinder nature, end parentheses, settled this dispute by separating earth from heaven. Some god, very, half-handed, lackadaisical, yeah, maybe, okay, maybe something. It could be a god, it could be some god. That's not really common. Think about, again, the example of Virgil or Homer. It's always very specific gods that have very specific actions and drive specific events. But now it's just kind of, ambivalent, some god, whatever. Or kinder nature. Nature can do something. Down a little bit more, line 41. Now, when that god, in parentheses, whichever one it was, had given chaos form, very insincere there. But again, he's kind of covering his A on that because it's he can always say, well, the gods are A, inspiring this poem, and B, whatever I'm saying is just reporting what the gods did. So I certainly have no agency there. I certainly have no culpability there. You can't blame me for this. All of this is significant, of course, because Ovid was later banished and had to go live out his life in exile and lived a fairly miserable life in modern day Romania. And, he died after like 10 years trying desperately to get back to Rome. So he knew that what he was doing was perhaps a little dangerous, challenging the idea of authority, challenging the idea of the centrality of the emperor, of the authority figure itself. Because what he's arguing for here is, as he's discussing creation possibly spontaneously, discussing the beginning of chaos. It has a certain Hebrew Bible Genesis feel to it. There's chaos at the beginning, and then life starts to, or creation starts to spontaneously erupt. And there is a bottom-up model being argued here, that it was not God directing this, or a god directing this, or even many gods directing this, but that it just happened. He's leaning a little bit on Lucretius here, the De Rerum Natura, who argues for or announces at the beginning of that book the essential indestructibility of nature, meaning that everything that exists has always existed in some form. So gods are becoming irrelevant. That's dicey. And even as he goes through those beginning lines of book one, We're getting like a mini physics lesson where he talks about the air separating and into different zones. It's really not that far off in some of this stuff, but it's a remarkably chaotic process of organization that is spontaneous and autonomous. It is not it is not the work of a divine intelligence. The arrival of man is, of course, a big event. The the creation of him in itself is uh, somewhat curious the way it is phrased. An animal, on like line 105, an animal more like the gods than these, more intellectually capable and able to control the other beasts, had not yet appeared, um, defined by his intelligence. Very significant. Think about that in contrast to the Hebrew tradition, where uh, human beings were fine in the Garden of Eden until they started to get curious and needed to exercise that intelligence. So intelligence is wrapped into both traditions with a slightly different take on perhaps judgment of how good that thing might be, and able to control the other beasts. Well, that's dominion over the animals. Again, sort of a you're the top of the food chain. So it is suggesting, again, a kind of authority structure within that, a hierarchy. Had not yet appeared. So he had not appeared, and then suddenly, now man was born. I'm not sure about the was. The original is natus homo est. Est is present tense. So now man is born. Man is born. Now it's a little uncertain how you take that, because that matters. If now man, was born or is born, are we witnessing the? Do we mean like the actual process of birth, or having been born? That's kind of significant, because it's whether or not you sort of glide over the actual event. Does God? Well, is man just spontaneously there, or at the end of a process of becoming there? That is significant. Because what we're talking about is the juxtaposition of those two things, where at one moment, at one instant in this, he did not exist. Man did not exist, and in the next, he did. Within that sentence, did not exist, and then he did. And between that, you can see what happens. Well, change, metamorphosis, something different happened. That is the theme of this entire work. The idea of something different happening, something new, something challenging, something uncertain. Always something happening, but the fact that it is changing is really the significant part, because change is continual. It is never ending, and it cannot be controlled. Clearly, all of this activity, all of these developments, are meant to be a kind of spontaneous act, not something particularly directed, not something controlled. And so change is always the rule, which is in such contradistinction to the Virgilian model, where everything is always about being stable. And Aeneas's whole duty that he's so slavish for is to get to where he can found Rome, so that that will be stable. They are exiles, the Trojans, sailing around the Mediterranean looking for a home. And so all they want is to find stability. Now, you can read into this a little bit the generational difference between Ovid and Virgil, in that Virgil was being a little bit older, came through a period of great stability and or great instability leading up to Augustine, and then was able to appreciate perhaps a little bit more of the stability that Augustine provided. Ovid's a little bit younger. Ovid grows up and he sees, everybody's so, so sold on stability. What about fun? What about dynamism? This is stability is boring. Come on. If you're always stable, you don't appreciate it that much. You want something more lively. You seek something more lively. Your temperament is perhaps more restless. And that plays out. Ovid ascribes all of the birth of mankind and all of that, again, sort of vaguely to a god. The fabricator of this better world created man out of his own divine substance, or else because Prometheus took up a clod, so blah, 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 blah. So he's just sort of mouthing these things, these creation epic tropes of gods getting in and doing something. I would say kind of insincerely. It's just, it's all very vague. Like, yeah, well, this might have happened. It might happen this way, or it might have happened that way. Or, it could have been this god or that god. Who cares? But he does recognize the significance of mankind, and he does identify that as a important moment. Line like 118, and even though all other animals lean forward and look down toward the ground, he gave to man a face that is uplifted, and ordered him to stand erect and look directly up into the vaulted heavens and turn his countenance to meet the stars. Which is a beautiful image, which is a dramatic image. The idea that of all of the animal world, let's say, mankind is special because mankind looks up. Animals look down. Evidence of a divine dominion, evidence of the apex of creation, apex of a special place in the universe. And it says that the earth itself, again, the translation here is a little bit iffy. The earth that was so lately rude and formless was changed by taking on the shapes of men. So man was so momentous a creation that the earth itself was changed because of it. So now, by the logic of Ovid's argument, the earth was changing all the time anyway, and every little thing changes everything. But here he gives special consideration to, I think, the advent of mankind and the belief that, well, that made things remarkably different. Earth was changing all the time anyway, but the arrival of man made a larger change. The creation story goes on through different periods. Ovid tracks it through a Silver Age, a Golden Age, Silver Age, an Iron Age, Bronze Age, just like a number of other historians like to categorize different ages of this and the age of that. And but you can see an interesting historical project there where he is trying to bring some reason to this and categorizing and organizing all of that information. And he traces a flood story where the the creatures of the earth, mankind and monsters, are getting a little bit close. At one point, monsters build a stairway to heaven. Uh, Led Zepp, but the contrast to the Tower of Babel is pretty obvious there. And when they do that, the gods say that, okay, they're getting a little bit antsy, they're getting a little bit uppity. We gotta just, let's just wipe the slate. So they send a flood and just wipe out everything. And rain, deluge, rivers flow, all of this brilliant poetry of nature, of the dynamism. Ovid loves water because it's always moving, always changing, so to speak. It's always, rivers are winding all over the place. They overflow. They collapse. They cut new paths. And you see this in the in the flood story, where it just overwhelms everything and changes it. Where what was land is now water, and water is covering everything except, like in certain cases, the very tops of mountains, which again has echoes of Noah. But then you get another story, the first real myth story to jump in there. That isn't a story about the creation. Is when we get to Deucalion and Pyrrha. And they are, in effect, a kind of Adam and Eve, or also a Noah story, where after the flood, they're commanded to go and throw their mother's bones over their shoulders, each of them, and they react to that like, well, that sounds very disrespectful. And then they realize. They are not told, they realize, they deduce that what that really means is, well, okay, Earth is our mother. And the bones would be rocks, stones. And so they each pick up rocks and stones, and they start throwing them over their shoulders. And those stones become bones and take on flesh, and that is the human race. That is the human race as we have it today. And Deucalion throws a bone over, and those become men. And Pyrrha throws bones over her shoulders, and those become women. And as myths go, quite frankly, it makes a lot more sense than the idea of the Hebrew Bible, where either the sons of Adam and Eve or the sons of Noah suddenly have wives, and you wonder, well, everybody else, there is nobody else. Where did these wives come from? Here, this sort of explains that, so it's a little bit more, workable myth. It stands up to logic a little bit more, but the idea is that this is where people come from, and people are coming from nature. It's not the creation of somebody forming from a clod of clay. It is not God directed. It is spontaneous. It is natural. It is not centered on the big guy in the chair necessarily. And that's part of what makes it such a fun piece. It's based on change. It's based on dynamism. It's based on humanity above everything else. And the idea that men in themselves, humanity in itself, is essentially change.